Welcome to the DRS Train podcast, Abu Dhabi edition. This service will be stopping at FP1 Juniors, Ferrari's strategy blunders, Tsunoda's heroics, the battle for P4 in the drivers and P2 in the constructors, and the pointlessness of the backmarkers. I'm Peter Brook, the man who thinks Ferrari was second fastest this year, and I'm joined by Nav F1, the man who thinks Mercedes was second fastest this year. Welcome.
Hi Peter, looking forward to covering this last race of the season.
No Ciaron today, but instead we have our first return guest, the Liam Lawson of the podcast, the mobile Chicane. Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me back, guys. Who do I need to talk to about getting my free coffee with the stamp cards? I was told if I did 10 appearances, I'd get a free coffee out of it.
Yeah, so we have no available seats for 2024. Maybe in 2025 we will consider redeeming your 10 appearances. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. I'll pop across to the Super Formula podcast for a little while then, and I'll come back here.
Sure.
So, Abu Dhabi, it did its job, which was to end the season, but I think in all respect, it probably could have been a bit more eventful as a race.
It was almost kind of frustrating in a way, you know, all over kind of social media that all the kind of F1 accounts really kind of drag out this thing of, oh, you know, there's the battle for P4 in the drivers, and actually only 3 people in the top 10 have been settled for the year, and, you know, who's going to finish up where in, you know, the battles for 7th in the constructors or something like that. And it was just kind of, just let it go, man. You know, nothing's happening, and we could all accept that. You know, it's been an interesting year, would be the kindest way of putting it. And it was just frustrating in a way that they were constantly trying to kind of beat this drum of that whoever finished P2 in the constructors, you know, the biggest thing that ever kind of happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was surprised by the attention that social media accounts gave to it, because I expected fans to be involved in Mercedes versus Ferrari and who would get P4. That's usually a thing that fans care about because they have their favorite drivers and they want them to do well. But the fact that there was a graphic for who will get P4 in the championship as if it decided anything, and that it was posted everywhere by the F1 accounts. I know that their job is to market the sport and to try to make us just get interested in the race, but it was weird, and you could see that they were scraping the bottom of the barrel. I was not surprised that I was surprised that there was not a graphic for who will get P7 in the constructors with AlphaTauri, Haas, Alfa Romeo, and Williams. I expected some weird graphic with the 4 cars at the back of the grid.
Yeah, I absolutely get it. As someone who was pretty much entirely watching the race just to see what AlphaTauri and Williams would do, you know, it makes sense from that perspective. But to try and make the whole race, you know, about that, and that whole weekend was what it was geared up towards. It was almost a bit silly in a way. Yeah,
and Leclerc, he shut that down pretty fast because they asked him, you know, what would finishing P4 mean to you? And he just said absolutely nothing. Because, yeah, it doesn't, beyond pride for the drivers, it doesn't really have an effect. It does with the constructors, but it's a marginal one. It's like, oh, you know, finish here and we'll give you an extra 5 minutes in the wind tunnel or whatever it is. And there is prize money at stake, but it's fairly marginal compared to actually fighting for the title. And, you know, even though the titles were only won a few races ago, they were effectively won 6 months ago.
Yeah, and another thing is, even when Alonso eventually got P4 in the championship, when they told him on the radio, it was just him reacting like, oh, nice. Isn't Leclerc in front of us? No? Nice. And you would think he would actually care because, you know, 10 years of despair, blah, blah, blah. But even Alonso was like, oh, yeah, that's fun, I guess. And I thought he would be the only one who would genuinely be competitive about it. So, yeah, those fights are good for stats. And when people look back on years, seeing who is 4th and who is 7th, it might play a lot into the fans' minds. But I don't think the drivers just care when they're not in the top 3 or if it's not really mattering to them.
Yeah, I mean, for Alonso specifically, P4 is probably his best since 2013, I suppose.
Yeah.
And he has he's obviously on the up and has high expectations, but it's not good enough. And particularly when, if you look at how the beginning of the season was, P3 as a minimum, possibly even P2 with the way Checo was driving, and obviously it just didn't work out that way. But yeah, at the end of the day, once the season is done and dusted, it doesn't matter. All that matters is is the champion. I mean, nobody really, unless your name is Felipe Massa, nobody really remembers the runner-up. Is the thing.
And yeah, the one thing is, if Alonso did finish fourth, well, which he did, I guess it paints him in an even better light because of where Aston Martin finished in the constructors. So it does matter in that sense. It's a bit like when Kimi finished in third in 2012 when Lotus was fourth fastest for most of the year. It does paint some drivers in some better light. It does benefit some drivers in some way, but yeah, it's at the end of the day, they don't care.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost more kind of about the little moments in the season for some of these people than the kind of that season as a whole. You know, Alonso, does he really care about finishing P4? Probably not, but getting to be on the podium, you know, so many times in 1 year, I think you hit over 100 career podiums now, and even for some of those others like, you know, a Pierre Gasly or an Esteban Ocon or something like that, you know, it's irrespective kind of where they really finished in the championship, but the fact that, you know, they got to get back on the podium again and enjoy kind of those little moments of success, that's the stuff that they're really going to kind of remember from the year.
Yeah. Well, in Gasly and Ocon's case, I think it's the only one where I think they really care who finished ahead. So I remember last week I mentioned that it could be a burning point if both Alpines made Q3, which, well, they didn't, as we saw, which leads us to talk about FP1 and all the juniors who were there. 10 rookies. Well, yeah, 10 rookies participating in FP1, new kids on the block. What did you guys think about their performances?
I mean, I've never seen that many juniors in one session before. I mean, 10 is a lot, particularly that Red Bull were willing to give up both seats as well to Jake Dennis and Isaac Hadjar. Most of them were good. There were a lot of good words said about Robert Schwartzman, Felipe Drugovich as well, because he was faster than Stroll. There are some, I mean, I think Oliver Behrman, maybe not driving that Haas just knocked him a bit when he went back to F2 because he wasn't so good in qualifying there. But it's just, yeah, as good as they were, like maybe 2 of them at the most are going to get a seat in Formula One within the next 2 seasons. That's the thing. It just felt like a formality, and obviously part of the rules that you have to have a junior run at least once a year because there's no testing.
It's a concept I really want to get on board with, and I love kind of the base idea around it of allowing us to get, you know, more sites of kind of these juniors and give them more bedded into Formula One and give them attempts to kind of show what they can do. But, you know, especially by chucking in 10 in the last kind of round of the season, it really kind of stinks of, oh yeah, that's a thing that we have to do, so let's just kind of shove them in there. And I think I'm not necessarily fully understand maybe what this kind of rule set is intending to do, because if it's meant to be giving junior drivers kind of a gateway into Formula One and sort of step in that way, it doesn't seem really to be doing that. I mean, we look into next year, there's no changes bar maybe Logan Sargent moving on, so it's not kind of opened any avenues that way. And I also think there's a real danger of, because they have to be juniors, because they can't have taken part in, I think it's more than 2 Grand Prix, there is definitely sort of situations where you have people like maybe a Robert Schwartzman or a Jack Doohan who you almost feel like that just their role forever now is just going to be fulfilling these kind of 2 mandatory sessions. You know, there's no real sense that Robert Schwartzman is going to be moving into Formula One, regardless of whether it was with, you know, Ferrari or a customer team or something like that as well. So it feels like they're kind of there to just almost make up the numbers in a way, tick the boxes. You know, it would almost potentially improved. I know when, you know, I first started watching Formula One, you had the constructors finishing 5th and lower. They had a 3rd car during free practice sessions for every single Grand Prix. And that was genuinely a good thing because it gave those further down the table more of a chance to sort of develop, catch up. But again, that was more of an authentic and actual avenue for people to get into Formula One. That's how we got the likes of Sebastian Vettel, Robert Kubica, even, you know, someone like Alexander Wirtz getting back into Formula One. You wonder whether maybe it needs to tweak something more in line with that, so it's more beneficial and there's more reason for us to be putting, you know, other drivers in there to give them a sense of what they can do rather than just for 2 quick sessions and then that's it.
Especially nowadays where Formula 2 drivers get so much attention and where younger drivers in general get just so much media attention and we know about them. Well, it's normal for us to know about Colapinto or even Zach O'Sullivan. I don't think that a few years ago people would have known him, but we know him because Williams Academy, they have done a lot of promotion for it. Formula 3, they spoke a lot about Zach. So we knew him when I'm sure that a few years ago, loads of people would have been like, who the hell is this? So it's nice to see those younger drivers get more attention, but if all you're doing is some random session at the end of the year, which might probably be the only official F1 session ever in some of their cases. Like, for example, I love Isaac Hadjar. I mean, I think his Formula 2 team rages are hilarious with his strong French accent and his, the tone of his voice. But I don't think he's going to be in an F1 car again. I know he's meant to be the test driver, but he's just not. Same for Vesti. I know that he finished second in Formula 2 this weekend, but is he going to make it to Formula 1 or even be an official test driver, FP1 driver? I'm not sure. So, yeah, it just makes me wonder why they're not doing more. And that also leads me to asking you, who do you think would even make it into F1 from this crop?
In terms of who would make it to F1, I suppose Behrman will at some point. Definitely a possibility with Drogovic. Jack Doohan seems very heavily invested in Alpine, and he's now, I think he's leaving Formula 2 now, having won the final race this year, to focus on his testing role or reserve role, but which just sounds like a waste of time. But he's obviously the first choice if either Gasly or Ocon go. Pourchaire just won the F2 title, and so now he can't race in F2 anymore. Again, he's a Sauber junior, but they've got Zhou and Bottas. But the rest of them, like Pato O'Ward, he's deeply entrenched in IndyCar. He's not going anywhere anytime soon, especially as a McLaren reserve, because Norris and Piastri aren't going anywhere. Jake Dennis, Formula 3 champion. He's never really been on the cards for Formula 1. Even if Vesti, because Vesti is a candidate, I feel like, for the Williams seat in place of Logan Sargent, particularly how he drove this weekend, and it was very good. He obviously really wanted the title. Mm-hmm. But even for him, he has to consider, well, there's this young Italian boy in the ranks that we need to start looking out for that's going to come up behind me, both me and Paul Aron in the Mercedes hierarchy. And again, George and Lewis are at Mercedes for the next 2 years, so that's completely shut off. Your only option is Williams. So most of them know it is just a formality because they just think, oh, but there's the rule that we have to have an FP1 session with the junior, so we'll just throw them in at the end, but we don't need it. Basically, we don't need them.
Yeah, and that may be something that they're fully acceptant of. If Robert Schwartzman's contract is you're never going to make it to Formula 1, but you do get to drive a Formula 1 car twice a year at a Grand Prix weekend, you'll also get to do a bit of simulator work or testing, whatever else. You may accept that and be, that's fine. That's more than the three of us combined are ever going to get to do. So, more power to it. It's weird in a way because it's, even though we're getting an opportunity to see them, we don't really get an opportunity to see fully what they can do. Again, sort of jumping back when we had these third drivers, they would do a lot of kind of low fuel runs. And it was always kind of like this mini battle on Fridays to see who would come out on top of the table. Would it be Anthony Davidson or Alex Wirtz or something like that? But it doesn't feel like they ever get given sort of a low fuel run or a quick opportunity, which is understandable because they're sat in Sergio Perez's car and they cannot afford for that to be binned because a rookie driver's making an error on their outlap. I think I mostly kind of agree with what you said, Peter, in terms of sort of who might make it into Formula 1. I think Pourchaire is probably the most interesting one. I read an article yesterday, I think it was from The Race, who was sort of saying, yes, he's good, but he's not doing that kind of Charles Leclerc-esque kicking down the door. You must absolutely sign up this guy, straight away. So we'll see kind of what he ends up doing next year. I think it's going to be a more full-time testing, maybe potentially get some more practice appearances at that Sauber outfit. I think Behrman's got potential as well. I think it's worth keeping an eye on the likes of Zach O'Sullivan. I know he didn't test, but Colapinto's in that conversation as well. There may potentially be a Williams opening up within the next couple of years or so, depending on what Albon or whoever else goes in that seat does. But for those further up, like the Dennis, the Hadjar, the Schwartzman, I don't fully see a way in for them.
Yeah, and we're talking about some drivers who usually don't get any low fuel runs. Drogovic, I'm not sure if his run was low fuel, but I think that was really impressive to, beat Stroll. You never really see those drivers, those FP1 drivers be even allowed to get a fast lap in. So I'm not sure what Aston Martin was thinking there, if they knew that it was a possibility that Drogovic could go faster than Stroll, because that was the talking point. Drogovic finishing second when Stroll finished, I think, 3/10 behind. I don't think that was a good look at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with when Jess Hawkins did that private test a couple of months back for Aston Martin, and they never revealed her lap times. And a lot of people were saying, well, I think we'll take that to mean that she was faster than Stroll.
Yeah.
I don't think she was, but some people seem to think that could have been the case. But it makes me think Spain last year, when Yuri Vips made his weekend debut for Red Bull, but he only did long runs on the hard tyre, and he was some 4 seconds off the pace or something. And that was he himself probably wasn't pushing it much, but that was very underwhelming. And then, of course, that was the weekend when everything really started going off the rails for his campaign anyway. But yeah, you'd think sometimes maybe I get the consideration not wanting to crash it, but also maybe not wanting to show up their current drivers, particularly if their current driver's dad is the one funding the team and has built the team basically for him.
Yeah. I mean, it's not to say that it's an impossible avenue for people to get into Formula One. I mean, you look at, Nick De Vries last year, who, did a free practice appearance for about half the field and was, subsequently under consideration by, not just AlphaTauri, but he was in, people were talking about him up for Williams and for Alpine as well. There is a potential for, people to impress by getting those opportunities, but it just feels a little muddied. And I think a lot of people just do take it as a thing for granted. It's just a box that needs to be ticked, and that's it, really.
Yeah, and talking about how much time these new juniors might have to wait to even get a seat. Liam Lawson is pretty much guaranteed a seat for 2025, and that pushes the deadline even more for the other drivers. And a discussion that was going on for a part of the year was, would Lawson replace Tsunoda? Tsunoda this weekend, going into quali, proved that he still had some things to show us. P6 in quali, which was the standout performance, I would say. But a few other talking points: Hamilton out in Q2, Sainz out in Q1.
There were more unexpected results than I was expecting, because Abu Dhabi doesn't really throw those kind of things up, particularly this late in the season. I think with AlphaTauri, they brought a new floor. I think for this race, or one of the more recent ones, they've been bringing a lot of upgrades, and you've seen the performance improvement. But this is by far his best qualifying, and particularly that Ricciardo was 15th or something. So that is a huge gap, particularly as Ricciardo had been kind of there or thereabouts since his return, and also even Liam Lawson had. But Sainz, I think it's a mixture of just getting blocked, but also just Ferrari being a bit stupid as usual, because the car was obviously fast enough to be at the front, which is normally where it is.
It was difficult. I mean, I was just watching kind of back over the highlights, again, just before we started doing this recording, and Sainz, I mean, maybe he just never, I forget if he was the one who was replaced by Schwartzman in free practice or not, but, he never looked fully comfortable in the car. Obviously he had the crash during in free practice. And then even when he kind of did get to put that lap together in Q1, he was only sort of, 2 thousandths above Perez to kind of nip back up into Q2. And obviously it was subsequently demoted as well. I don't know if it's a lot from column A, a lot from column B in terms of, was it Sainz's fault, was it Ferrari's strategy fault as well? I think Sainz is a very interesting driver. He reminds me in some ways of something like, like a Trulli, a Fisichella, a Bottas or something like that, who, when they're at their peak, they are untouchable, but those peaks are very kind of few and far between. I think Singapore was a fantastic display from him, but then thereafter there's been kind of a middling kind of trajectory after that as well. It just may be the case of he just couldn't get it right this weekend. He absolutely got screwed over with the strategy on race day, but even without that, given how he had those struggles throughout the rest of the weekend, it's how far he really would have got with a better one.
Well, another driver who didn't expect to be knocked out was obviously Lewis, who was knocked out in Q2. I think that Mercedes did not quite expect Hülkenberg to put a lap in, which would be Q3 worthy. And I think it's the last time of the year to mention how this is weird, especially in quali, because how many times have they made Q3 this year? A few times. Obviously, as we will talk about, the race pace is just abysmal. The car just goes backwards and backwards every single race. But it's impressive how they've gotten into Q3 5-6 times this season, and they always seem to catch a top team out.
Yeah, and it's almost silly in a way that Mercedes wouldn't kind of focus on that, because we know, if we know, and we're kind of sort of casual, I say casual, regular F1 observers, if a full team of kind of mechanics and strategists and that notice that Haas is gunning for Q3, they should know that if there's one thing Haas can do this year, it's have good one-lap pace, regardless of what happens on a Sunday. They're always going to be a threat to make that kind of Q3. I mean, Hulkenberg has been as high as second, before he was, later demoted. So there is a lot of potential in that car. So it was almost a bit naive of Mercedes in a way not to kind of focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton, he just said something's not right with the car, and maybe it's just, I don't think it's him necessarily. Maybe they just got the setup wrong, but obviously George adjusted far better to it and was 6 or 7 tenths faster on his Q3 lap. And he himself showed the car was competitive because he qualified near the front and was in the race was running at the front in a way that Lewis just wasn't.
Yeah.
So I think maybe they just gone wrong with setup. I mean, another point I wanted to make was Logan Sargent, who I think for maybe the third time this year officially did not set a time because he had his times deleted for track limits.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, track limits are still an issue. Again, this is a circuit you would expect that because it has so much. There's no grass or gravel; it's just runoff everywhere.
Yeah.
So that happened to him, and then also happened to Checo in Q3. He had his best lap taken away, and it seems to be that it's those two. It seems more often than anyone else are the ones getting done for track limits this year. And it's like, well, even if you're gonna be abusing track limits, could you at least compensate for that by being fast anyway, rather than having lap times that aren't that good then deleted for track limits?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because they always seem to get into trouble, but it's not like they're setting the timing screens alight. So I'm not too sure why they're going off track. And Checo in particular, I was reassured a bit when I saw him go up to 4th or 5th at some point. It just made me laugh when the lap got deleted. I was like, again? Like, even now there's still another Perez talking point this week. Are you again gonna make this week about you and how you're 8 spots behind Verstappen? Because we thought for a little bit him and Leclerc would be the main competitors to Verstappen, and we found out it would probably be Lando. But Lando also made a mistake. I want to say that drift was extremely impressive. I thought for 1 second, if he still gets pole with that drift, it's one of the most epic laps of all time. But he didn't, and then it just becomes another one of these laps where he couldn't get it right in Q3.
Yeah, very, very 1980s.
I was going to say, it reminded me a lot of kind of like a Ronnie Peterson, Tom Price kind of move going around a corner there. I mean, a lot was made that was kind of what cost him pole. That lap, including the drift, was 5 tenths shy of, half a second, shy of what Max ended up achieving. I don't think he would have lost half a second just within that mistake alone. Obviously definitely cost him a spot further up the grid, but I don't think there's any conversation as to whether Max would have got pole or not.
It was just funny that there were, in practice, there were so much discussion because the Mercedes were nowhere near the front, and they were like, this car is not working for them. And obviously both drivers didn't do FP1s, they'd lost track time. And then Max goes fastest in all 3 qualifying sessions. It's like, did you honestly think it wasn't going to be the fastest car this year? Like, yeah.
It's indicative of kind of what we've seen at every single weekend so far, where I've had just about every digit thinking maybe something will go wrong for Red Bull this weekend. There's going to be an error, a mistake, or something like that. And you hear, we, like you just said, in free practice they were maybe struggling a little bit, or we've had other sort of moments in races where Max is sort of saying, "Oh, there's a problem with my tires, there's a problem with my gearbox," or something like that. And then obviously naturally it just fizzles out to nothing at all, and it turns into an absolute cakewalk from that point on.
Yeah, he likes to complain about gearboxes. Almost every race he's like, oh, the gear shifts are heavy or they're not working. The only time the gearbox has actually died on him was in quali in Jeddah. Yeah. So once in 22 races. Otherwise, the car's been impeccable for reliability, just like basically every car this year has been. They just haven't... It's just been aside from Singapore, it's just been a perfect clean sweep for Red Bull basically.
Yeah, well, on that, Verstappen was the third driver ever to complete every single lap in a season after Schumacher in 2002, and Bottas in 2019. Kimi in 2012 would have also joined, but he got lapped in Brazil thanks to forgetting that the old runoff area was closed now. So that's an interesting fact. But yeah, Verstappen became, and it's generally what happened. But yeah, Verstappen, third driver ever to do that, and it's just it was incredibly easy for him in terms of reliability. He didn't have any issue. Going on to the race, it wasn't as easy for him, I think, at the start, but still, he had everything under control. His teammate didn't. So, all of Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, as we're going to see, had a weird dynamic where one driver was great and the second driver was not so great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, well, Max did his thing. I mean, Leclerc was challenging him for the first couple of laps and then just fell behind and kind of gave up. So, I mean, Max did his thing. Checo, aside from the penalty, was very good. He did gain a lot of ground. Obviously, he eventually finishes fourth from a net second. So he did make, for once, he did actually make up a lot of ground where normally you'd expect him to just get stuck. At the beginning, one thing that stood out to me was we mentioned Haas with Hulkenberg qualifying P7. He lost that almost instantly. I think he'd lost about 5 positions before they got to turn 1, so that was undone already. And then they had no pace anyway. But it was quite engaging for the first maybe 10 laps because the commentators were saying, "Oh, everyone wants to be tyre saving, but they're forcing each other to push." And there were massive, DRS trains everywhere. There were like 2 big ones, and everyone was staying really close together. It's like, well, this is what we want to see. We want them to be close, and we don't want them to be like, okay, well, now DRS is activated, so now we're going to go into tyre saving mode. They were actually they were pushing quite hard and being quite competitive with one another.
The start was really frustrating for me. For Leclerc, he was almost in kind of 2 minds about whether he wanted to challenge for the lead or not. There was about 3 occasions where they were heading down into a corner. You had the first going into that first corner, and then sort of beyond those sort of kind of long straights as well. And it's almost as if, I don't know whether he thought he'd completed the move or he was just a smidge too hesitant or something like that. He's going wheel to wheel with Verstappen at this point for the lead of the Grand Prix. He needs to be so much more aggressive because Max is always going to fight tooth and nail for whatever is going to kind of counteract that same way. He just needed to be a touch later on the brakes, or just like I said, just a bit more aggressive into this course. And we could have seen, we've seen 1,000 laps of Max Verstappen leading a Grand Prix this year. That's the opportunity for someone not to be doing that and to mix up that order. And he just didn't seem to have that in him today. I don't know whether that's because he was partly thinking about wanting to get P2 for the constructors and wanting to play it safe and not cause a collision. But yeah, that was the point where maybe we could have seen a change for the lead of the Grand Prix, and sort of thereafter there was no real kind of conversation about whether Max was going to win it or not.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. I thought that Leclerc didn't dive bomb with more intent. It was move that was there and he went for it, but surely just brake a bit later or just release the brakes a bit. Even if you push Verstappen a bit more, that there's no issue. And the only thing you have to gain from it is, the only thing you have to lose from it, is, well, maybe whoever's in P3 takes the spot, and in the best case scenario, you're leading the race into the end of lap 1. So I'm really not sure why he didn't dive bomb a bit more there. We've spoken about Leclerc in the past, how he just doesn't really want to compete with Verstappen just now, because I think he's accepted his fate that at the moment Verstappen is too far ahead. But you put Alonso there, you put Lewis Hamilton there, they would have at least completed the dive bomb, I think. And yes, Max could have passed with DRS in 2 laps, but go for the move.
Yeah, and especially considering kind of the shenanigans we had at turn 1 into Vegas as well, where Verstappen had pushed kind of Leclerc wide and then taken the lead there as well. He's not afraid to kind of get his elbows dirty for that sort of thing. So Charles, he needs to kind of be repaying him that favour in a way. It's not just for a lead of the Grand Prix now, it's to kind of, it almost sets a precedent in a way. They talk about this when people are looking to kind of overtake certain other cars. You get kind of a reputation of this guy's going to be very kind of aggressive and harsh when it comes to overtaking, or this guy is a bit more relaxed, might give you more of an opportunity. In a way, it's done damage not just for the potential of a difference now, but a few Grand Prix down the line next year when someone's going for a move on Leclerc, they know he's maybe not going to be as aggressive as others are going to be as well, and they're going to be more inclined to pull off a riskier move, knowing that they've got more of a chance of doing it than if they were going over an Alonso or a Norris or something like that.
I mean, his teammate, by contrast, had quite an interesting race. Starting that far back, I thought he was going to be doing long runs, and initially he did, and then they started putting him on some really. They made him go for these really aggressive strategies, and it's like, well, the general the general consensus is that if you're starting out of position that far back, is that you do long runs and try to gain positions off people pitting and get track position. But Sainz just, even though the car had the pace, he himself just didn't, and he made hardly any progress and got basically nowhere near the points in the end.
A lot of that is due to that strategy that made no sense, and as we saw, they were waiting for a safety car. I mean, you're not a Haas, you're not a backmarker. How is Ferrari waiting for a safety car? That's the most naughty's backmarker strategy ever. And you're talking about a team with a good driver that is fighting for P2 in the championship, who could have easily, I think, finished at least 9th, 8th with a good strategy. When that radio message went through, I was really appalled. I had no idea how they could have possibly thought about that.
Yeah, waiting for safety cars is not really something that should factor into your standard strategies, particularly at a circuit like this where it's dry and it consistently produces some of the least interesting races we have. You can't, like, it happens when it's like, oh, we're expecting rain in X amount of minutes and it just doesn't come, and so we're going to keep you out as long as possible. It's like, maybe just think in the now and not think, oh, well, that this might happen in the future, even though there's no evidence that it will. And it's, if a safety car happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And just try and improvise, but don't talk about it as if it's planned, like with Bernie Ecclestone wanting to have, sprinklers or that sort of thing. That we know it's going to happen, we just don't know when. Yeah, they did, because they did two long runs on hards, and then they had to pit him again right near the end, and they put him on softs. The only person to touch softs, because I mean, soft tyres in general this year have been basically useless in the races. They've been just good in quali, but in this one, he was the only one who went near them, and then he got lapped at the end, and then pitted on the penultimate lap to retire, or on the final lap, because I guess they thought, well, there's no point finishing because we're outside the points.
Yeah, I was going to sort of echo exactly what you said regarding safety cars, Peter. Especially Abu Dhabi with, such, like I say, it's a very dry kind of area, but also such vast kind of runoff areas as well. I feel like we do quite rarely see safety cars around here anyway. I mean, obviously, the obvious kind of instance I can think of would be, I think it was 2010 when Schumacher and kind of Liuzzi had that big collision at the beginning, or obviously when he had Latifi in 2021 as well. But other than that, it's not really kind of a circuit which is really kind of instant laden, or one of those more kind of chaotic ones where it's kind of almost a valid strategy in a way to kind of focus on a safety car, compared to if it was like Albert Park or something like that, where there is more kind of room for incidents and more likely that sort of thing to happen. It was almost kind of desperate in a way.
The only other safety car I can think of at Abu Dhabi was 2018. When Hulkenberg ended up upside down like that. Or 2012, of course, had two for both. There was for Carter Kane and Rosberg, and then Grosjean and Webber. But otherwise, every other race you could, other than maybe 2016, you could just blend the rest of them into one because they're so indistinct from one another. It just doesn't produce. It's the only time it's produced a good race that wasn't a title decided was 2012.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the strategy itself, doing hard before waiting for a safety car, at least if they had done their mandatory pit stop, they can wait, and if nothing works, it's fine. But the fact that they were already, 8th or 9th with that strategy, even if there was a safety car and if they pitted for softs, I don't think they would have finished higher than 10th or 9th. So it made no sense from the onset that it was hards, then maybe 6 laps on softs from 13th, 14th. it made no sense whatsoever. And I'm sure that when Leclerc heard about it, he just face-palmed and sighed.
Yeah, but they kind of backed themselves into a corner in a way, because I think they did mention the same thing on commentary as well, where it sort of got, I think he got to lap 50 or whatever it was, and they sort of said, you know, even if the safety car does come out now, he's still going to pop out around 14th or 15th. But, you know, by that point, they'd kind of committed to that bit, and it would have been kind of the same damage as to whether they pitted him then or on lap 56. You know, it made no difference whatsoever. So they kind of went all in on that gamble, and it just didn't pay off at all.
And it cost them second in the constructors when they should have been able to very easily take it. When you look at how Hamilton drove, because he started 11th and he finished 9th. So he gained 1 place off of Hulkenberg having a really awful start. And then he would have gained another place off of Gasly, because Alpine, again, there was talk of, oh, well, these two are really close. There could be something interesting there. But then both of them finished outside the points.
Yeah.
Of course, he did have that collision with Gasly. There was just a light. Gasly locked up in front of him at turn 5, whatever it is. It used to be turn 8. And he knocked off, and that damaged Hamilton's end plate, and it took a chunk off Gasly's diffuser, and that explained why his pace went out the window. And yeah, he tried, and then he passed Tsunoda on the final lap and then ran wide, and so he just didn't have, it just wasn't his day. His results at Abu Dhabi, it's very up and down, because he's won a title at this race, but then he's also lost 3 titles at this circuit. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for him.
There was also obviously the issue with Alonso, which we will talk about later, but the battle with Alonso, I think, influenced his race a lot, because if he went past Alonso at that point, he would have had a better race. And he had good pace, I think, because he was closing in onto Alonso for a good couple of laps, and then I'm not sure what happened, if Alonso just decided to accelerate more. That last battle with Tsunoda, that was very uncharacteristic from Lewis to make that mistake. Tsunoda had tires that were shot. I guess Lewis's tires were a bit worn out by then. But yeah, ending the season with going wide in a fight with an AlphaTauri, it's not really the best way to end the season. And it's good that Perez had that penalty for Mercedes to still get P2, because if Mercedes had missed out on P2 with this dive bomb that messed up, there would have been a funny conversation around it, that's for sure.
But speaking of Tsunoda, he by contrast had a very strong race. So, you know, gets his best qualifying P6. First stint, he was running P6 as well. He was keeping up with them. He did a very long first stint. He was one of the last people to pit, because he, in the end, was going for a 1-stop, which is what Bottas did, which didn't work for him. I thought my first instant thought was he was going to do a 2-stop, but he was running long, and then he might do another long one, and then he would just sprint in the final stint, do a kind of Kobayashi. But then we found out he was doing a 1-stop, and because the undercut was so powerful here, he was losing so many places, and he dropped. I mean, he was leading the race for about 5 laps, which is I don't know the exact race, but it makes him the first Japanese driver to lead a Grand Prix in approximately 20 years.
Yeah, Sato was the last one, which probably would have been around 2004, I think.
Yeah, my first. I haven't looked this up at all, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was maybe the Nürburgring, because he started on the front row in that race, or maybe.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Or maybe Indianapolis, because he was on the podium. One of those. Yeah.
It was one of those stronger ones. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Kobayashi, but never led a race. Interestingly enough. And then I thought, well, no, they're ruining this, because he's going to have to try. We've seen how badly it's gone for Bottas, and he's just going to fall out of the points. But he managed to hold on, even though I was legitimately thinking, if they went aggressive, if for once a team went aggressive with a strategy when they're supposed to, maybe he could bag a podium. But in the end, he got driver of the day and managed to secure 8th place.
Yeah, a lot of opinions on Yuki Tsunoda. Obviously, from my perspective, I was cheering for him to fall down the order as much as possible in order for Williams to kind of hold on to P7. You know, I think later on I would have been quite happy if he'd got on the podium or done something brilliant. But yeah, from my perspective, it was better. It's an interesting year for Yuki Tsunoda. I think this has been almost completely his best year in Formula One, and not just for a race like this as well. I think especially at the beginning of the year, when how bad that AlphaTauri was, but how he was routinely dragging it, you know, kicking and screaming either to 10th or just outside of the points, was really strong. But we kind of briefly touched on it earlier, but obviously there was a lot of chat about whether someone like Lawson should have replaced him for next year. You know, in my opinion, I'm almost surprised in a way that Yuki Tsunoda is still going to be in Formula One for next year. And that's not because, you know, he's a bad driver. Like I say, I think this is kind of at the best we've seen him. But if you think about that AlphaTauri outfit, or, you know, whatever you want to call it for next year, you know, the purpose of that team is that they're there to kind of assess those that they are interested in sort of promoting to the main team. Those that make the cut, they move on up, and those that don't, they get shifted sideways or get stuck there in a way. And obviously a lot of the discourse this year has been around Sergio Perez and what's going to happen with him. A lot of conversation about whether he would be removed before the end of his contract. But the names kind of being linked to that, you know, rightly or wrongly, were if Perez does go, it's going to be someone like Daniel Ricciardo or Liam Lawson are kind of sort of top of that pile. Potentially Lando Norris in the mix as well. To my knowledge, I didn't see kind of any publications or suggestions that Yuki Tsunoda, again, rightly or wrongly, should have been kind of included in that conversation to move up to Red Bull, which to me suggests he's almost kind of fallen back into kind of that Gasly kind of role in terms of someone who they almost don't know what to do with him in a way. You know, they rate him enough that they want to keep hold of him, but they don't rate him enough to consider him for a promotion to the big team. So in that case, again, this is going off of rough statistical knowledge, I don't think anyone has stayed at that outfit for sort of 3 consecutive years. That's normally kind of their time when they assess how well someone's doing, and then they either move on or they get promoted. And obviously Yuki's staying on for a 4th year now. But it seems weird in a way that they wouldn't go for something for Ricciardo and Lawson, because if those are the 2 people that they are genuinely considering for Red Bull, harshly, what is the point of Yuki Tsunoda doing there if they have no consideration for moving him up there at all?
Well, one thing is, well, the Raging Bulls, as they might be called, they brought a new floor to the last race, and they have been bringing upgrades into the last races because they want to be competitive in 2024 as this even more independent outfit, which is still relying a lot on Red Bull data from what I hear, and that's how the new floor was that good. So it's a bit weird. They want to be more independent, but again, they're using a lot of Red Bull data and analytics, and it's working for them. Tsunoda should be the leading driver for this Raging Bulls project. And I heard some rumors at some point when people were saying that Lance Stroll might leave the sport, that Yuki would be considered for Aston Martin. Those were rogue rumors, but it is kind of the only way I would see Tsunoda go to another team. It's if Lance leaves, they don't trust Drogovic enough and they get Yuki. But yeah, the new floor worked well, and Yuki knows how to make it work, I think, so that's fantastic for them. But it's a bit hard to know where they're going. They think that they could be a top 5 team next season, and a bit like what we're going to say with Alpine later, how do you become a top 5 team at the moment? The top 3 spots are locked in. McLaren, Aston, they seem to also be there for a while. So I'm not too sure what the Raging Bulls want to do with Yuki. Maybe a rogue podium somewhere in a race of attrition.
Well, Raging Bull is a much better name than what they've actually called it, which is Racing Bulls.
God, I'd love it to be Raging Bulls.
That would be...
Yeah, my name is better. I'm sorry.
Raging Bull. I mean, I think it should just be Minardi, but yeah, if they want to call it Racing Bulls, they can. I mean, it was going to be Hugo Boss or Hugo Bulls or something at one point.
Yeah, something awful.
But yeah, Tsunoda, I mean, he has one of the longest stints. I mean, he's going into his 4th consecutive year, so that's the longest consecutive stint anyone's ever had, because Buemi was there for 3 years, so was Verne. Kvyat has on-off had however many, 14, half of 16, 17, 19 and 20, so he's had like 4.5 seasons broken up with them, because again, it's not somewhere that you're meant to be there for long. Most people are there for no more than 2 years because of how the team is designed. I think he should stay, because he has, even though he had races like Mexico, he has matured enormously and he's taken on that leadership role within the team. Ricciardo, he's here because of Netflix. We don't need him around anymore. Lawson should be in the team because, again, it's meant to be a team for young drivers and juniors, not someone who spent several years in the top team and now is just coming back for his retirement. like phase. It's that's not what the team is meant for. But he is also kind of there at the behest of Honda. This is one of the interesting things about basically every Japanese F1 driver, is that they get into Formula One because they're backed by either Honda, Toyota, or Yamaha. And once Honda formally break off from Red Bull, Aston, because they're going to Aston, maybe he'll go there, but otherwise he may not have anywhere else to go, and then maybe he just ends up in WEC, or he goes back home and does Super Formula.
But yeah, it's good to see that the flow worked, and that at least for now they seem to have some direction where they're going. The strategy was yet again weird. One stop, as we said, it could have been much better, and we've gotten used to AlphaTauri going for weird strategies. But I'm just glad that, Yuki ended the season well because of all the talks that he could be out.
Yeah, in many ways, Yuki is kind of unlucky and Lance Stroll is lucky that this Honda deal to Aston Martin isn't occurring for sort of another year or so. If it was lined up for next year, it would make absolute perfect sense for Yuki to move over to there. In my mind, that's kind of a logical step up from what, someone like Lance Stroll is currently performing at, and obviously then frees up kind of those seats at that outfit for Ricciardo and Lawson as well. That seems to be kind of maybe a more logical fit for him to move somewhere else. He's going to need to do just feel like he's going to need to do a Gasly at some point and kind of spread his wings and find alternative point, which, if he continues the rate of improvement that he's done, he absolutely deserves, because he's been, a fantastic driver this year. It's just, Formula One is never as simple as the best drivers getting into the right seats at the right time. We'll see what happens next year and what then kind of opens up when most of the contracts do start ending and seat swapping begins.
I know Yuki has had a very polarizing season for many. I have enjoyed the season, many have not. And it's interesting you mentioned Lance, because I think it's a good way to also talk about his similar strategy to Yuki's one-stop strategy as well, which worked really well for him. I don't think there was in Yuki's strategy, there were flaws, and I think he could have finished high as Peter implied. But Lance did 2 stops, but he also pitted late, I think. Yeah, he pitted very late for his first stop, but contrary to Sainz, he actually pitted a second time, and it was much more organized than Sainz. So he basically did what Ferrari should have done with Sainz. And yeah, that was basically the best strategy I think he could have done. Very good race to finish in 10th and strong into the season, just getting a few points here and there.
I wonder if the strategy was the way it was because they knew they had to get a top 6 position. That was the only way that they were going to realistically kind of vault Williams. And I think I'm similar as you, Peter, in a way, in that I've got a multitude of kind of spreadsheets laid out by alternate ways to run the year, both on qualifying results and all these other bits and pieces. And I've got one where sort of I view it from the prism of what if we were still sort of going through the traditional F1 point system of just the top 6 scoring points. And I haven't updated it for a little while, but it was looking the case that this was going to be one of the years where sort of we had the fewest number of point scorers in a way under that system. Barely half the field had just about scraped together to achieve a top 6 result, which comes down to the likes of Red Bull pretty much hoovering up at least 2 of those positions every race, add in kind of some of the bulletproof reliability we've seen from other places as well. It's been very hard for those smaller teams to get a big result like that. Even Alex Albon, with kind of all of some of his heroics this year, has, I think, his 7th has been his best. So it was going to be regardless of kind of how well they were going in qualifying, again, we know based on Haas, just because you do well on a Saturday does not mean that same kind of pace can move itself around on a Sunday as well. So you wonder whether AlphaTauri were kind of back to this corner of we have to do something different from everyone else just to try and hope that it works and get that kind of that big result that we need that would be maybe difficult otherwise.
I've just opened one of my spreadsheets. So if this season had the original 1950s point system, one thing I've forgotten to do is take off the fact that only a certain number of video results counted. 14 drivers would have scored points, which is more than you would expect. Because I think, but that's including like the fastest lap and everything. This is the thing. If we'd used the point system used up until 2003, none of the bottom 4 teams would have scored any points.
Yeah,
because they wouldn't. None of them finished any better than 7th. But it is interesting because it means that Verstappen 176 points. Checo in second got 74, so he got 2.5 times as many points as him total. But one thing it does draw attention to, and again we'll discuss this, is the battle for P4, because in this one it's actually a battle for P3, which ends up with 4 drivers only 3 points apart. But what we ended up in the race, and this ended up being the main takeaway, was that battle for P4, which saw some quite significant switches in the end result, mostly in that Sainz dropped from 4th to 7th by not finishing in the points in this race.
I think that's a big let-off for Sainz. I think he was very happy with his season, and most of his fans were happy. It's incredible that he won a race and is now P7 in the standings. He's the only one apart from the top 2 to have in the standings to have won a race, and he's dropped out of the top 6. So that means that some fans in the future, looking back at this season, might think that Sainz winning in Singapore was some race of attrition a la Alonso 2008 or some weird controversial race. No, it was a win on pure pace, but it will genuinely not look like that in the standings. And I think that's where it mattered, that Sainz could have finished above Leclerc. That's important for their dynamic. But 7th makes it look like he had a very mediocre season.
Thing is, he was actually very consistent. It's just that he got only 3 podiums the entire year, whereas Lando got 7 podiums. Leclerc got 5. Alonso got 7. 8. Okay, and then Hamilton got 5. Or no, Hamilton got 6. So yeah, I mean, George only got 2. Piastri got 2. Yeah, that's the thing. He was consistent, but he was finishing mostly like 4th, 5th, 6th, not on the podium. So that was, and he also had, Qatar. He never even started the race, so that never helped him. It was everything behind Verstappen was just so close. Like, I need to rejig the results. If Verstappen didn't exist and it was a one man band at Red Bull to see how the championship would have gone, I need to look at that at some point.
Verstappen dominating so much was helped by Perez, who we finally have to touch upon. Perez, who, well, yes, obviously his season wasn't great, but this race could have been a very good race from him. It could have been a nice fight from P9, I think it's 9th, to 2nd. Could have at least 3rd. And it just became a story of yet another stupid mistake, which really shouldn't have been there. I cannot emphasize this enough. It just shouldn't have been there. There was no reason for him to make that contact with Lando. He can say whatever he wants, that he was on the inside and Norris turned into him, which is wrong. There was no need to be that aggressive. It would have been a simple DRS pass, maybe on the next lap. And he blew it for himself. He kind of blew it for Ferrari in the fight for P2. And it's yet another mistake that just added to all of his woes this season. A thing I noticed is that mistake, dropping him down to P4, means that Verstappen has more than double his points, which is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, I think they mentioned on the commentary as well that there were very few 1-2s between the team this year. I'm not going to drag up the constructors table so I can look at it properly. But if you're considering what is effectively kind of the class of the field comfortably, let's have a look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Yeah, 6 1-2s from, what was it, 22 races for what's been one of the most dominant cars that we've seen in Formula One history. It's a ludicrous stat in a way that Perez hasn't been able to take advantage of that. I think he has struggled with the mental side of things this year. It seems bizarre that, you think back to when he'd won in, I think it was Miami, we were genuinely thinking, oh, could Perez, do the unthinkable and actually win this championship? And then, not long after that, we were then discussing whether he'd even be in a drive for the next year as well. You know, I wonder maybe if he doesn't necessarily know what his motivations are. The way he's kind of driven, it almost reminds me of kind of watching me playing a Formula One game or something like that, where I get so bored of doing it that I purposely qualify at the back and then try and kind of carve the way through the grid in as few laps as possible or something like that. You know, and that is potentially when he's been at, you know, his best is when he gets to kind of sort of relax and do some overtaking and do some time management or something like that. But it's just kind of gone off the rails, and there's just been a few too many kind of clumsy mistakes.
Yeah, so on the 1-2 finishes, again, I have a spreadsheet for this, going back several years, because this car, they have kind of squandered it in terms of dominance, or Checo has, because, I mean, next year I'll do a, you know, 2020s car ranking halfway through the decade thing, and at the moment it's a kind of toss-up between this car and the 2020 Mercedes for the number one spot. But yeah, so yeah, like you said, there were 6 1-2 finishes from 22 race starts. That's 27%, only one front row lockout. But then if you look back a little bit further, so Mercedes in 2015, they had 12 1-2s from 19 races. That's 63%. And they had 15 front row lockouts, which is 80%. And then 2014, there was 11 out of 19 and then 12 front row starts. Red Bull before this, the best they did in 2010 and 2013, they had 4 1-2s. And in 2010, there were 8 front row lockouts. Ferrari's best one, 2002, they got 9 1-2s in 17 races. That's 53%. And then 6 front row lockouts, which is 35%. And then McLaren in 1988, 10 1-2s. So that's 63%. I haven't done front rows for that. So this is a car which is as, if not more dominant than all of those cars. And the stats really don't show that because of how much of the weight was being carried by Verstappen. It should have been... There's little to no excuse other than Singapore for not having front row lockouts at basically every single race. It's,
you know, we talked about how Sainz being ranked as low as 7th won't be perhaps truly kind of indicative of how well he'd been at this year. You could argue the inverse in a way for someone like Sergio, who the history books are going to say Max won the championship, Sergio Perez was 2nd, but it almost doesn't. I don't want to say he doesn't deserve it because, you know, he's a race winner and he's scored podiums, but he's not. I suppose, well, no one has been kind of any kind of pretender to the crown, and you almost kind of have to skip over 2nd this year. We'll just leave that blank, and then everyone else can be tied 3rd or something like that. You know, that's how far ahead Max was. But yeah, it almost kind of looks a little bit strange to kind of be viewing Sergio Perez as a championship runner-up. I suppose in the same way that you'd look at technically the likes of, you know, David Coulthard or something like that is technically that as well, even though it was never really kind of in the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those years where it's a formality in terms of who gets the title. You can compare it to 2020, 2013, 02, 04, 93, 96, maybe not 96, 93, 92, just years where there's just one driver and there is no competition, and it's just that they're racing essentially alone. And you're just waiting for when they clinch the title rather than if. But yeah, if you'd have to compare him to their teammates and see how it was compared to, say, Patrese and Barrichello and Webber and Bottas, and it's just a lot worse. I mean, I think it was over either 02 or 04. Schumacher came very close to getting more than double Barrichello's points, but not quite. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that close in 93 because Damon Hill, he got a couple of wins. 92, so did Patrese, and he gave them a lot of second places with Mansell.
Yeah.
It's just the balance is huge. It's much bigger than it was with Hamilton and Bottas, and even Vettel and Webber.
And I think that has had an impact on kind of how this season's felt. You know, we've finished watching the race yesterday, and I was with my partner, and she said, you know, was it ever like this before? You know, when like Hamilton was winning or something like that. And I don't honestly remember. It may be sort of some of that British bias within me. I mean, when Hamilton was dominating, I don't recall being almost kind of as bored with it in as a way. And that's a horrible thing to say. And especially for someone who's been watching Formula One for about 20 years now. But I think there's a little part of me that if we weren't recording this podcast today, I would have genuinely debated whether I watched yesterday's race, because it's become such a formality and a procession in a way. It almost reached that point of kind of, this is 2 hours of my day off. I could be playing Stardew Valley. I could be watching It's a Wonderful Life on TV or something like that. That will give me genuine enjoyment. Or do I sit through another 2 hours of what is just increasingly predictable entertainment in quotation marks? I think what makes a difference is that there's that huge gap between Verstappen and Perez that we didn't have as much of. I think it wasn't great when it was sort of between Hamilton and Bottas. And again, I don't think anyone really truly believed that Bottas would come out on top there, but there were still occasions where he did have more of the upper hand, and at least there was some engaging challenges and some stuff happened. But it's been a long year.
Yeah, it's funny because on lap 23, Lewis was battling with Ricciardo and Bottas. And one of my mates with whom I was watching the race said, yeah, that would have slapped hard in 2018. Because, in 2018, Lewis, Ricciardo, Bottas, it could be a genuine fight. And this year, Verstappen, apart from some times where maybe Leclerc could have gone for something, and Alonso in Monaco, Eran Intermedios, it was Inters, they'd never put them on. Those impacted the season. And going back to Perez's move, it just seemed rash. And his recent performances implied that he was a bit more comfortable and felt less scared of driving. And then he makes that move. And we're here again talking about what's going on with him. That move had impacts for the standings, because at that point, Norris was P4. And that move had put Norris, was P4 in the race, but also P4 in the standings. But then the overtake meant that Norris went back down to P5, losing him that P4 in the standings, permanently, because best case scenario, he would finish 5th with Leclerc 4th. But meanwhile, Alonso was defending from Lewis to try to maintain P7 in the race, which would lead to P4 in the standings. Alonso trying to defend against Lewis, it was entertaining for the second stint. And then the third stint, after the second pit stop, we had the brake check. So looking back on the clip, I can say that I have, for some reason, closed my eyes every single time that clip happened. So I don't think Alonso was in the wrong. But on a more serious note, he was definitely not doing something good there. And he was extremely lucky that the FIA didn't give him a penalty. I saw a really funny comment that this was basically the FIA being like, oh, this is the last race of the season, last day of school, no need to do the homework. I'm sure that any other race he would have gotten a 5-second penalty. And the fact it was Abu Dhabi played a role into him not getting anything. I also do think that Alonso did want to do the same move as in Canada 2013, where he just wanted to not get DRS. He just didn't want Lewis to not get DRS. But for what it was a brake check. He should have either braked on the inside and let Lewis go through on the outside, or gone to the outside earlier. But what it was just a brake check that shouldn't be accepted.
Oh, Alonso races me so hard, man. That's what I was thinking. It made me think, Bahrain 2008, obviously they the similar thing, and they did make contact there. I mean, those two, Alonso's always going to race Lewis probably a bit harder than most other drivers, I think. Same with Verstappen. Yeah,
and he did. It did not surprise me. And in the interview, Ben, later on, he said that Lewis has a lot of experience in racecraft. I have more, which is such an Alonso thing to say. Obviously, he said it with a smile, but all the British media accounts, Autosport and stuff, have to quote it out of context to make it seem like, yet again, Alonso has said something that proves that Lewis lives rent-free in his head and he still hasn't forgotten 2007. Small thing on that. Alonso is 42. I'm pretty sure he is not thinking about 2007 every single day like some fans do. So I'm not even sure what that was about. But going back to the race, that brake check might have gotten him P7 in the race and P4 in the standings. And that also makes us think, what do we think of Alonso getting 4th in the standings? It was a valiant performance. It was a very good season from him. I don't think that any of us expected him to get 4th come October when the Aston was really, really starting to lose pace. And in the end, it's, in his words, his best ever season jointly with 2012. Just my opinion quickly on that. I don't think that's true. There were many mistakes in 2023, especially in quali, which means that it wasn't a season that was as good as 2012, but still a very good season from him.
He's been very good, and I don't think... I think he's been good ever since he's come back. You know, I think it was maybe a little easier to miss when he was at Alpine, and it was more of a midfield operation. I mean, a lot of us remember kind of how it was his defensive driving that kind of assisted Ocon into winning in Hungary, but he's had plenty of other good races and results. I think going back to last year, I think I ranked him 4th best of all the drivers or something like that, because he was just so relentless at kind of scoring points and maximizing opportunities. So it's been, you know, an incredible year to kind of look back on and see this old veteran in a way getting kind of a second boost of life to get back into kind of competitive machinery. And in a way, he's really unlucky that he's been in such competitive machinery in a year where Max Verstappen has just been so unflappable and so unstoppable. You know, any other kind of normal year, that Aston's getting maybe a couple of wins. We're seeing Alonso back on top of the podium for the first time since 2013. You know, and I think it was bar a slight change of strategy in Monaco, we would have seen that as well. But that's, you know, it's all ifs and buts, and we can do that about any kind of number of races where people should have and could have won. But yeah, it's been really good to kind of see him back on top, and it's kind of reminiscent in a way of kind of when people kind of fall away from the top of the field, they go from more of kind of like a villain-esque kind of figure to more of a kind of an icon and someone that a lot of people are rooting for. And I think it was the same with kind of like Vettel as well, as he kind of fell back when he was kind of at Red Bull. It was kind of seen as the target, and he was, you know, petulant and whatever kind of words you want to use as well. But as he kind of moved back through the field, there's been more enjoyment from kind of the results he picked up. And I think it's a similar kind of thing with Alonso as well. You know, when researching videos, I obviously go back and read through a lot of kind of race reviews and old season guides and something like that. And Alonso was kind of the pantomime villain of Formula One for such a long time. It's nice to see that we now have a figure that we can kind of enjoy what he does and appreciate what he's doing now, and just getting those little extra bits of success.
Yeah, I mean, he's been around for such a long time. You have to go really far back to see the kind of villain era that he had, and the same with Vettel. I mean, that was, yeah, because again, his Red Bull years, everyone hated him, and now they love him. Lewis has never had a sort of a villain era in that sense that I can think of. Maybe that's British bias, I don't know, but and the same like Max, you call this his villain era. Maybe in 5-10 years, if he's not dominant anymore, people will warm up to him a bit. But it's just fascinating to me. It's the longevity of Alonso that I find so interesting. That next year will be his 23rd. It'll have been 23 years since he made his debut, and he's been on the grid longer than some drivers have been alive. It's the dynamic change, because a lot of Formula One's fan base is so new. They have no memory of stuff that happened in the past, and they don't remember how people perceived different drivers. And for example, they will have never seen Lewis when he drove for McLaren. They've only ever known him as a Mercedes driver, and they haven't seen Alonso. This is the first time they've seen Alonso in actually good machinery, even though it's still not really as good as the Ferraris that he had, and obviously nowhere near the Renaults and everything. It's a kind of car that, I don't know if it is a race-winning car. Any other season it would be, but obviously not this season. It just wasn't quite there. Whereas at least with the Ferraris, he was competitive, and even in 2011, 2013, he could win a race here and there, basically.
Do you think that the kind of results that Alonso's being put forward perhaps changes the dynamic of Formula One that we might have coming up, because for a long time it's about Formula One's becoming younger and younger. We had, culminating when Verstappen turned up in a very embryonic kind of state. And I think for a lot of people, they kind of cite sort of historical moments like, performances by 40-somethings like Nigel Mansell or Michael Schumacher or something like that as a sign of there's a point when you need to stop and you need to know when to kind of call it quits. But does sort of the longevity of Alonso maybe change that opinion for a lot of people? A few years ago, we would have been talking more about the likes of, in a way we are, but kind of how much longer does Lewis Hamilton have, or some of those kind of other older generations like a Nico Hulkenberg or something like that as well. But can we now kind of cite going, well, actually age isn't maybe the barrier that it once was before, because if Alonso's still able to kind of produce those kind of results, then why can't these other, talented drivers, be doing the same well into kind of that same kind of time period as well?
I mean, you talked about the longevity. If he had taken part in FP1, there would have been 6 drivers who would have been born after his first race on the track at the same time as him, which is absolutely incredible, considering that I checked in the past and there had never been a case of a driver being on the same track as another driver who had a race before that previous driver was born. So Piastri and Alonso were the first instance of this. And yeah, it could have happened in an even bigger scenario if Alonso had taken part in FP1. His longevity is incredible. There was another interesting statistic that in 2004, Alonso finished 4th in the championship as well. 3rd place was a British driver, and 1, 2 were locked in by a dominant team. So there were some jokes that, is this a sign that 2024 and 25 will be another double world championship for Alonso? That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think I saw that. I think his first test in a Formula One car was in 1999, so a whole 2 years before he actually got a seat. So then you can throw in Tsunoda and Logan Sargent as well as drivers that he kind of predates being in a Formula One car in. I think when it comes to age, the main barrier, it doesn't seem to be age and fitness, even though they were trying to imply that with Kimi and Schumacher. I think it's more to do with commitment, because by that point, a lot of them are starting families. And this is the thing, Alonso and Hamilton are both bachelors, but then some of the older drivers like Magnussen and Hulkenberg and Perez, they're all married and have kids. And that's what Vettel has as well. But Alonso, he doesn't have he doesn't have familial ties to, and he doesn't think, okay, well, I don't want to keep risking my life for when I've got a family to care for and everything. Obviously, I made the mistake in the episode with Josh about saying that Scott Dixon was pushing 50 in IndyCar. Obviously, he's early 40s, similar age. I think I got him mixed up with Helio Castroneves because I think he is pushing 50. He's definitely a bit older. But yeah, IndyCar, the average age is actually quite high. And that's very, very physical and also much more dangerous than Formula One. And they're still doing that and still driving well. So it has a bit of an effect. I mean, the only thing I've seen him mention really regarding fitness and everything else is more that it takes him a bit longer to recover from jet lag, and that hurts him more. But his general fitness is obviously fine. It's not affecting his driving. I don't think in that car he would necessarily be driving it any better 20 years ago than he is now. So at the moment, there's no reason. I mean, by the end of next year, he'll have passed 400 race starts, when we used to think that 300 was a big marker. And there is actually a small battle between him and Lewis for the most finishes. So even though he has about 40 more race starts than Lewis, I think Lewis is only like 1 race behind him in terms of number of actual classified finishes. But that speaks more to the car than the drivers, I think.
Yeah.
I think it helps that Alonso, when he was at McLaren in his second stint there would be many races where he would be dwindling down and dwindling back in P15 and just be like, yeah, calling it today. I'm going to say that my floor is broken or my engine is broken and I'm just not going to finish the race. But yeah, I think another thing is it does seem to impact him in terms of recovery, as you said. He said at the end of this race that he's going to actually take some holidays after this season. But he will be testing on Tuesday, the 2024 car or something. which Max isn't going to do. And Max was surprised during the interviews that Alonso still has energy to do testing for the 2024 cars next week. He also said that he's going to be testing DTM cars in Aragon in December. So I have no idea what that is about, but I think it's just fun for him.
Well, he's another one of these drivers that he doesn't do anything outside of F1 because again, it's a generational thing. He's one of the older drivers who comes from the pre-social media age. He's not constantly posting stuff to Instagram, and we see very little of what happens off track with him. But it sounds like maybe he doesn't have many other hobbies beyond. I think he does some cycling, but otherwise he's not like, because Charles Leclerc, he plays piano, Lando does his streaming and graphic design, Max goes home and continues driving even more on his sim rig, and Lewis has got all of his Lewis has, his fashion line and charities and activism and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, Alonso, he doesn't give much away, but that was how it was with every driver 20 years ago because there was no social media.
That's one big thing to say about the 2023 Spanish TikTok Personality of the Year, which Alonso won last week for his relentless activity on TikTok. He doesn't give much on him, and I think cycling and racing are his two main hobbies, and it just keeps him going, I guess, which is good for him. He still has a drive to thrive and do well. A team actually that does not seem to have a drive to do well is Alpine, which leads us to our next segment on the backmarkers. The backmarkers, well, Alpine wasn't a backmarker, let's not be harsh, but 4 teams in this race were unable to score any point and never seemed close to it. I guess Gasly at some point seemed close to it, but Alpine, I don't want to turn this into a season review because it's just a race review, but this race really showed what Pat Fry had been saying on their lack of ambitions and their stagnation just seems to always come back. And there was a stat at the start of the weekend. What was the pace difference between the 2022 cars and the 2023 cars? Williams had gained, I think, 1.6 seconds. The Alphas, so Alfa Tauri and Alfa Romeo, they had gained like 1.4 seconds. Obviously, the teams that gained the least time, the least time were Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. But one team was above all of them, Alpine. Alpine had gained the least time of all the teams between 2022 and 23, further proving how they've been stagnating. We must say that Ocon was sick during the last week, and Gasly did have some damage after the contact with Lewis. But yeah, it's just really hard to know what happened to them.
I mean, one interesting thing of note, and this seems to happen a lot with teams, these kind of upper midfield teams, is that in Q3, Gasly's lap time was half a second slower than in Q2. And unless he made a mistake, you must assume that a lot of drivers, they just put a banker lap in and don't really bother pushing it. And it's like, well, it's Q3. It's the one time you should really be pushing it. And if like his Q2 time would have been fast enough for him to qualify 7th, and if he'd improved just a couple of tenths, he could have been up, 5th, possibly even 4th. So the pace was there, but they just didn't really use it. And then obviously, he gets the damage in the race, and then he was complaining why he fell behind Ocon and the pace went out the window. But they were the only sort of true midfield team once McLaren got good, because until then they kind of was competing with them, but then they were just stuck in the middle by themselves because they had the other teams behind that were just useless all year, and then the other ones at front that were regularly getting the points. So they just kind of got lost on their own, but not really taking, aside from 1 or 2 podiums, not really taking advantage enough of when things went wrong at the front.
In a weird way, they kind of tie with like Alfa Romeo in a way of kind of being one of the more anonymous teams of the year, in the sense that, yes, occasionally they were, but not always, and quite often not. They weren't fast enough to really keep pace with the leaders or be involved in kind of that conversation for the upper points. But nor were they kind of slow enough to be, featured when cars were getting lapped or things were happening towards the tail end there. So they sort of just kind of toured around, and they were kind of safely ensconced within that sort of, was it P6 they finished in the constructors?
Yeah, it'd be P6. Yeah.
So they were never really kind of in that conversation to be any higher than that, but then never in any danger to be any lower than that. So yeah, I mean, it says on the side here, Alpine don't know what they're doing. I mean, that much is indicative of the huge kind of management upheavals that they've gone through as well. You wonder kind of what the next step for them is, or what they're going to do to push forward. The logical next step is kind of for them to be reaching kind of like that McLaren kind of peak performance, where they are more regularly kind of in the conversation for podiums and to be, you know, in contention in qualifying as well. It's going to be interesting to see what they choose to do next year, not only from, you know, an on-track performance perspective, but also, you know, we're going to get into a very big merry-go-round of drivers swapping and changing and moving around. It's where Alpine's going to fall within that. You know, Gasly and Ocon are very good. They're both, you know, race-winning drivers, more than capable of getting on the podium on occasion. It's whether either of them at this point in time is capable of making that step up to push Alpine into that upper echelon. That supposedly that's what they want to be doing, or whether they start having the conversation of trying to lure someone in from somewhere else.
Yeah, basically the next step for them is to fire the entire management again, mess up some contracts, start a new 100 race plan, and maybe rebrand as the only other Renault affiliated brand I know is Dacia. So Dacia F1 team, and maybe lose 3/10 of race pace again. I think that's the only thing they can do. It's frustrating because I really wanted them to do well. I think I liked their entire ethos, at least in 2020 and 2021, and now it's just become a mess. Another team that we think, well, at least I think, could be stagnating for a while is Alpha. Well, not Alpha anymore, but Sauber, or whatever it is next year, as well as Haas, actually. Both of those. Haas, I saw a stat yesterday. Their last 5 finishes in the constructors have never been higher than 8th. And yeah, Sauber just nowhere again. But all 3 of those teams, I have no idea what their plans are. Alpine, I don't think they can go higher. And more focused on Sauber and Haas, there's no way they're really going upwards, are they?
Yeah, I mean, Williams at least caught your attention because they're Williams, and because the huge imbalance in drivers, in the driver standards, and the fact that Albon was having these breakout performances, and Williams, again, everyone loves them because it's Williams, and James Vowles, he's a very compassionate, very congenial team principal, but there was just nothing remotely interesting about Haas or Alfa Romeo this year. They just weren't. They weren't competitive. They were very rarely were they competitive. I mean, towards the end of the year, there were a couple of good. I mean, Qatar was the only really good race for Alfa Romeo. 2 very uninteresting drivers. Again, Haas, 2 quite old drivers, both dads, both in their kind of retirement phase. The car just not like it sums up in this race that Hulkenberg, he qualified 7th, and then by the time they reached the first corner, he was already outside the points. And then they were just invisible for the rest of the race. There's just no point being here, really, when they used to be able to have standout performances, and that isn't happening anymore. And they don't have an interesting sort of ethos or vision or something that makes them stand out. They're just not interesting at all, really.
Yeah, I mean, Alfa Romeo at least have kind of the caveat of, they're going to become Audi in the future, but that's still 2 years away, and it almost kind of feels like they're just waiting around for that to happen and for them to be kind of interesting and relevant and do something more exciting. And I mean, Haas, what do they do really? I mean, even there's this ongoing saga of, will Andretti get in, will they not? And if they do, then kind of Haas lose that kind of one defining feature of, at least we've got an American-based team. You know, you'd expect Andretti to be a lot louder and more kind of results progressive if they do make it. So what do they do? You know, it sounds like that the Alfa Romeo branding isn't going there. Looks like that's just going away for now. So it's still going to be just kind of Haas next year. And bar kind of that 1 year, I think it was 2018, I'm saying off the top of my head, where they were sort of more consistent midfield runners with Grosjean and Magnussen there. They've sort of fit into that Sauber kind of mold of just being there. And obviously that's not necessarily the case. There's people there that are passionate about racing and want to achieve kind of results. But if going back to Andretti again, if people are so kind of anti sort of inviting these new teams who generally want to go racing and make big results happen, then why are we kind of almost putting up with this anonymity at the back in a way where people should be moving forward, or just trying to do something different or offer up something else?
Sauber and Haas, they're not getting relevant again until Sauber gets Porsche and Haas somehow puts Ollie Behrman in their car. I think that's the only way people would get interested again.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think Haas, Mazepin and Schumacher have put Gunter off taking rookies for good, basically. In 2020, Haas scored 3 points and they finished 9th. This year, they've scored 12 points and they finished 10th. This is much more monotonous. I mean, obviously, 2020 was another year dominated by one team and one driver, but it had a lot more sort of unexpected races, and also Williams were awful in 2020.
Yep.
But they just, there's the thing, because they've lost that image of being the American team. Not that they were that American to begin with, to be honest. That with that, if Andretti come in and if the rumors are true that they're going to be taking customer engines from Cadillac or General Motors, it's like, this is a proper American team. Like Haas is a sort of hybrid, like British Italian team, basically. Alpine is a British team. Like Red Bull and Mercedes are British teams. I mean, Sauber, Alfa Romeo. Well, obviously the branding is Alfa Romeo, but the team is Swiss and the license is Swiss. But like the other, and Ferrari and AlphaTauri are Italian. But the rest of them are all just like British teams. Like Alpine, for example, if they wanted to make themselves properly French, they should move their base out of Enstone and move it to somewhere near like Manicourt or Paul Ricard. And they should because they brought in all of these brand ambassadors, all these random athletes, all of whom are British.
Yeah.
So maybe some French ones might be good. Like, even though Prost was awful, at least they were French. And Ligier was French. Like, just try and make it that way, because every other team is just British, and all the staff are British and senior management, and all the bases are here because of Silverstone.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And well, going back to the race, it's time for us to the race rankings, our top 3 of the race. Chicane, who do you think was your top 3?
Annoyingly, it's difficult to look past someone like Max. In a way, the only way you can kind of justify not putting him in the top 3 is because he's just doing exactly what we expect of him every time. I mean, obviously, Yuki had a fantastic race in there as well. So I think definitely those two in the mix. I'm trying to think of this. I was thinking all morning trying to find sort of another third kind of standout one in there. I mean, there's sort of almost little asterisks around everyone else's performance, like Leclerc perhaps wasn't quite aggressive enough and could have done a little better. Obviously, we've talked about the problems for Perez. It's a tricky one. I think I'd say we'll put Yuki at the top, we'll put Max second, and then let's maybe put Leclerc in third for at least having a go, even if it was half-heartedly, at Max at the beginning, and then trying his best to kind of coerce that Ferrari into P2 in the constructors with those kind of shenanigans at the end, even if it didn't quite work out for him.
I mean, for me, well, Max, because he did his thing. Tsunoda, obviously, got kind of screwed over by the strategy, but kind of made a sow's ear, made a silk purse from a sow's ear. And then I think Leclerc, because obviously he tried to attack Max at the beginning, stayed relatively close. But one thing we didn't mention before that I thought was interesting was his sort of mental arithmetic he was doing at the end. Because he was, when he found out about the penalty for Checo, he was then thinking, okay, how far is Russell? So if I let Checo through or give him some DRS, and then I have to sort of pull a Checo and try and slow Russell down, or do what Hamilton did in 2016. It didn't work at all. I mean, he let Checo pass him just before turn 4, but without DRS, when really he should have let him pass him on the straight with DRS. That would have been much faster. And he didn't slow down enough to start backing George up.
Yeah.
So kudos for trying, but obviously it just didn't work.
I think you could also sort of argue Russell into contention for top 3 of the race. Obviously he had the edge over Hamilton all weekend, and actually it's not been anywhere near kind of a perfect year for George. There's been a lot of mistakes and problems, but this race was, as far as I remember, pretty error-free from his perspective as well. So he just kind of did what he had to do to get Mercedes that kind of P2, and that's exactly what he did, and he didn't do anything silly with it.
Yeah, my top three would be Yuki, George, and I know that our producer would like this. So Lance, because Lance made a typically aggressive strategy work. We often say on this podcast that people don't go for aggressive strategies anymore. At least he went onto the mediums at the end and tried to push a bit. Leclerc, yes, I respect the fact that he did some mental arithmetic, but it still didn't really work out. As Peter said, turn 4 wasn't the best spot to get past. So yeah, Tsunoda, George, and Lance. My flop of the race is not a driver, but just that Sainz strategy. I have no idea what was going on there. It made no sense as a viewer, and I'm sure it made no sense for the drivers when they look back at it.
Flop of the race. Lewis is one that stands out. I think Hulkenberg. I would even say Tsunoda's strategy. Like, he made it work, but it was an awful strategy. He could have, if they'd gone more aggressive, he could have been maybe as high as 5th, I think.
Flop of the race for me, not a driver or a team or even a strategy. For me, it would just call it back to the beginning. It would be just the whole of Formula One social media throughout this entire weekend, attempting to kind of drum up any kind of fake interest into who would finish P7 or any kind of nonsense like that. You know, there were better ways that it could have been done. And yes, there was disappointment in the race, but there was nothing perhaps more disappointing than maybe Formula One falling a little flat from that perspective.
That's a very good point, Chicane. That's a very good point. What would be your race score then?
I feel bad rating it sort of as low as a 1 or a 2, but it just, I guess a few things happened, but sort of bar that brief like glimpse of kind of Leclerc peeking down the inside of Verstappen on lap 1, it was sort of rinse and repeat for, you know, the 19 other instances we've seen of it this year. The fact that there was the odd tussle here and there, but otherwise mostly kind of trains going down the straights. Yuki Tsunoda being in the lead and sort of competing at the front was a good thing to see, so that makes it a little bit more positive. I'd stick it around probably like a 2. You know, 3 stars for me would be saying it was fine. 2 stars it was quite dull really, but there were the odd moments which perhaps maybe a little bit more notable.
Yeah, that's fair. That's maybe a bit harsh to my liking. I think it was a nice race. I would go completely the opposite way and put 3.5 maybe, because I actually enjoyed the race. Maybe it was the company, I have no idea. But it was quite nice in terms of the battles for P2 and P4. For some reason, I got really invested in it. Obviously, Alonso fan that helped, but just in general, I found it quite interesting. There were not a lot of overtakes, I will give you that, but I still enjoyed it, so 3.5 for me.
I'll give it 3. Better than nothing. One of the better non-title deciding Abu Dhabi races, I think. I mean, I was thinking about this. If you tried to repicture this, say Max and Checo weren't in the title fight, but they suddenly found pace, and this battle for P4 was battle for P1, but nobody was anywhere. That would have been really interesting to see, and that would have made the stakes, particularly with Leclerc trying to do his mental gymnastics, only for then Alonso possibly to suddenly win the title on count back as well from Leclerc. That would have been quite interesting to see, but yeah, better than nothing. So 3 stars, I think.
Of all the races, it was certainly one of them.
Right, I think it's time for the DRS rankings. So what do we have this week? Driver, Marcus Ericsson, interesting. So he's one who I suppose, I think the way I would describe it, I think he sort of overstayed his welcome. He stayed around longer than you would expect, and there's reason to believe, if there are complaints about, you know, internal sabotage at Sauber, that there were forces in the background keeping him in longer in terms of sponsors and everything, which made him look better than he was. Yeah, just average sort of pay driver-ish lower midfielder that stayed around a bit longer than he probably deserved, I think.
Yeah, well, that's quite kind of you, Peter, because I have some very bad views on Ericsson. I think 5 seasons for him is one of the biggest scams of the last 15 years. And okay, let's say 10, last 10 years. I have absolutely no idea how he had a seat for 5 years. I mean, we're talking about 5 entire seasons, and he was there getting beaten by his teammate, I think, every single time by quite some margin. I'm not really counting 2014. But yeah, it was just really sad for me to see how he essentially got rid of Felipe Nasser and Pascal Wehrlein due to his sponsors and just politics. He had one of the most unimpressive GP2 records ever. I think he spent 4 years in there, best finish of 5th or 4th. So yes, since then he has won Indy 500 and he finished 2nd, I think, this year and was close to winning it again. I had a video actually planned on him on how I was going to call him the biggest scam of the last 10 years. And then he won the Indy 500 a week later, so that video never got released. I just think he was very much a D-rated driver, and I still think it's an absolute shame that he got rid of Felipe Nasser and Pascal on his own, pretty much, because those were 2 very, very talented drivers.
Yeah, I think especially we coming from an era here where, you know, this is when we had your Caterhams, Lotuses, Virgins, Mauritius, whatever you want to call them, and we just kind of had this on kind of revolving door of middling GP2 driver gets a seat there for 1 year and then is immediately ejected for another middling GP2 driver who then immediately gets ejected again. For Marcus to kind of stick around as long as he did was kind of a surprise in a way. You know, he definitely doesn't belong in kind of like an F tier sort of thing. I think that is very much firmly reserved for UJE Days and Jean-Denis Delatrazes and things like that as well. But I think I'm going to just drag up his results here quickly as well. I don't think he ever kind of finished above, maybe I think an 8th was his highest kind of finish. I know that might have been a very attrition-based kind of race as well.
Just putting some context again, 5 seasons, that's as many seasons or more than the entire class of 29 has had. So think about George, Lando, that's as many seasons as them, and that's more seasons than Alex Albon. 5 seasons is a lot, and I have no idea how he was there. I mean, I know why, but yeah, the fact Charles beat him so easily as a rookie, obviously it's Charles Leclerc, blah, blah, blah. But yeah.
The fact that as well that he was at Sauber the fact that he was at Sauber for 4 of those years, and you've got this stretch going from Italy 2015 all the way to Bahrain 2018 where he didn't score any points. You know, that's for an operation like Sauber, like we've said, it's an anonymous one. It's one that's not quite a backmarker, but they're at least one that pretty much reliably will always score the odd point here and there. It's almost quite a ridiculous streak to have, and for that to then be justifiable to keep churning out a seat year in, year out. I mean, his final year wasn't too bad. 2018 was a bit more consistent in terms of point scoring finishes, but I think paired against someone like a Leclerc at that point, then yeah, there was no real chance. So to think where he kind of sits in this rankings, it's got to be probably about a D tier for me.
Yeah, I think D. There's the odd passable result. I mean, in 2018, if Longbow Finance was still trying to sabotage Leclerc, it obviously wasn't working. But he has, just overstayed his welcome. I think similar, you can compare him in many ways to Lance Stroll. And in Formula 2, he's very much like someone like Roy Nissany. He's just there perpetually, but driving completely unremarkably. And you just hogging a seat that needs to go to somebody else. But not only hogging the seat, but like we said, actually kicking out drivers that deserve to be there much more than him.
Yeah,
just as a way of making himself look good. But yeah, no, he's never really had. It's hard to think of any genuine standout performances. There's just the odd race here and there where he got points.
The standout performance, or the standout moment, is that crash in Italy, really, isn't it? When he sort of,
I was gonna say,
that's the kind of the thing that I think about most, which is
he did have a few very big crashes. I remember Hungary 2014, there was a big shunt in the Caterham. Singapore 2015 or 16, he had a big shunt. No, it's not Singapore, sorry, Silverstone. And then Brazil 2016, which is where NASA saved the team and then got fired. He crashed there as well. So he did crash quite a lot, actually. But so I think a D is fair.
Yeah, and I think it comes with the caveat as well. This is obviously indicative of his time in Formula One. Obviously, he's much a different driver, sort of within Indy circles now. I mean, I don't follow IndyCar racing, so I don't know kind of see how he's viewed over there. Obviously, I know of his success in Indy 500, and I think he was briefly leading the title race at some point. It might have been this year or last. So he's made an avenue there, which is, you know, good for him. But obviously, it's a very different series, different kind of skill set as well.
He made it into F1 folklore forever with that Ericsson hitters moment from Grosjean, which was one of the first big memes, I would say, of the meme era of Formula One. Moving on from Ericsson, the track we're rating, after concluding with a D for Ericsson, the track we're rating is the Yas Marina circuit, the new layout, well, the layout that's been there since 2021. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Well, in general, I'm not a fan of track layout changes because it means you can't directly compare lap times of older cars anymore. And so they've done this. So now we can't compare these cars to the V8 diffuser cars. And it happened in Albert Park. We can't compare the ground effect cars to even the cars from the mid-90s anymore because that's how long that circuit went without being changed. But with this one, I think it does flow better because they took out two chicanes, which from a spectator point of view, the chicanes look quite cool because it has a sort of snake effect, like on the first couple of laps, but it doesn't help momentum. The turn 3 chicane wasn't much of an overtaking point, and now that's become a major overtaking point, even though unless you're fighting for the championship on the last lap, it's not an ideal place to pass because you go straight onto into a DRS zone. And then that sort of quasi banking at the other corner, that does seem to work well, and we saw a lot of good moves and passes being attempted there, like with George and Piastri yesterday. But Abu Dhabi in a whole, the thing is, aesthetically, I do actually quite like it. Maybe it's nostalgia of the early 2010s because it has a stadium effect, but whilst also being quite open. And this is the thing, it's one of these circuits where it looks like that, but it still feels like you're going somewhere. Like the hairpin at turn 3, that feels a long way away from like the tunnel underneath the hotel. So it's still, that is good, but yeah, otherwise it's lots of 90-degree turns and stuff. I think I'll throw it in B. I think it's, yeah,
I think
aesthetically it's good, yeah.
Yeah, I think I tend to do the same again. From an aesthetics point of view, it's certainly a nice circuit to look at. I love how it goes from sort of that daytime to twilight kind of effect. Has always been quite cool. And sort of that big fireworks display we all get at the finish now. That was sort of really one of the first ones to do that, if I remember correctly. And yeah, looking down at us, like particularly when they flow kind of through that marina area, and you can see them go underneath the hotel and the bay to the side there as well, is quite nice. There are, it doesn't always happen, but there are points for overtaking those nice long straights leading into sort of those smaller kind of turns, particularly when it gets kind of those sort of fun and games of strategy where someone's heading into kind of that at the end of that first straight into that first left-hander, and it's kind of, do I overtake here, or do I kind of maybe hold back a little bit more and then reserve it for the DRS that's going to come next up as well. And we've seen more recently as well, when they come to the end of that second straight, that people are being more obliged to kind of push around the outside and trying to hold it around there, which is, looks really quite cool as well. I think inevitably as well, it's got, the circuit's always going to have ties to kind of moments in kind of F1 history, and the 2021 race is always going to be kind of tied to that, and the images and everything that went around that, rightly or wrongly. That pushes it certainly away from maybe some of the other circuits which suffer from similar perspectives of creating trains and some not always exciting races, but it's got enough kind of moments of kind of history and aesthetic moments that, yeah, I think it does slide into a B tier as well.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on this. I'd also put it into a low B. It's not a bad track. We're stuck with it for a few years as the final race of the season, but it's not bad. It's far from great. So I'll be nice to it and just give it a low B. Staying on to the topic of Saubers with Ericsson rated earlier, we are rating the 2023 Sauber as car today. A car that has been bad, but still made Q3 a couple of times. I have in my stats Bottas 5 times and Zhou, I believe, 2 or 3 times. They had this incredible Q3 in Hungary where they qualified 5th and 7th, which was incredible for them. Double points finish in Qatar. But other than that, they're so forgettable. Without this becoming a discussion on Zhou and Bottas, both of them have been really forgettable this year, especially Zhou. But the car itself, it's just been... You just forget them. And if there are any Alfa Romeo fans, there might be 3 of them, including the team principal or the team representative, as he's called. I don't know how you would survive this season. There's just nothing going for them. So I would put them in D because F is reserved for the absolute minnows of F1, but it's impossible for me to go higher than D for that car.
Yeah, I mean, D, because you can compare it to early 90s back markers where most races they're useless, and then there's the odd race where they would score points. The difference was that back then they would score points because everyone else broke down. So with this car, you can at least say, oh, when they did score points, it was genuine because the car was fast for whatever reason. But otherwise, it just doesn't. It doesn't stand out from an engineering perspective. There's not. I mean, there's nothing unique about any of these cars really. They're all basically just very poor copies of the Red Bull. And otherwise, yeah, just getting eliminated in Q1, running around 13th and 14th, just not. Yeah, just nothing. There's nothing to say really on that car. So just a D for me.
I think the most exciting thing that probably happened with Sauber this year was that they decided, for whatever reason, to run this livery where it was just this all black finish on it, which basically made it look almost identical to the Mercedes and Sublight.
Yeah.
And that was perhaps the most exciting thing that maybe happened in the last race. Went, oh, someone's overtaken a Mercedes. No, wait, that's just the Sauber there. It's just done what pretty much 90% of every Sauber car has ever done, which is, again, it kind of slides into that kind of Alpine motif of not slow enough to be considered a backmarker, but nowhere near fast enough to be really regularly kind of scoring points or challenging for anything above that, and just occasionally getting the odd point here and there. I think the only thing maybe separating it from other Saubers is that they didn't get just kind of that one crazy race this year where they just got an enormous windfall of points. A la, 2003 America, or I forget where it was. I think it was Brazil one year when Raikkonen and Giovinazzi came. I think it was 4th and 5th as well. So yeah, that aside, pretty much in line with what you guys have said. Not bad enough to be dropping into the kind of that F tier, but not spectacular or any way different enough to go above something like a D.
Yeah, I think D is fair.
Right. Well, with Abu Dhabi done, I think that's a wrap on 2023 and this episode. Yeah, reasonable way to close the year. Obviously, in light of the fact that there was no title fight, I think it did its job, as I said at the beginning.
Yeah, it was a good race. Season was disappointing for sure, but there were good battles going on elsewhere in the standings, so that kept it alive. Good season for Alonso, which is good for me, I guess. 10 years of despair to finally see him finish P4. And looking forward to the big season review coming soon.
Yeah, in many ways, this race was kind of indicative of what we've seen throughout the year, in that Verstappen's winning, that's probably settled and done with, so let's just kind of concentrate on what else is going on further back, and that will make it just a little bit more exciting and give us something to watch, because yeah, if you're looking at the front for something to see different or exciting, it's not going to be there.
So yeah, thank you to Nav once again, and thank you to Mobile Chicane for joining us for a second time. If you want to plug yourself, where can people find you?
You can find me at the Mobile Chicane on YouTube. We just reached 10,000 subscribers. I am currently halfway through editing our 10k subscriber special, which is the wretched racing of Ricardo Rosset, where we attempt to defend the actions of one of Formula One's kind of most maligned drivers. And we've got all sorts of other content up there about drivers and teams and Grand Prix of varying quality and importance as well.
You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Join us for our next episode, where we shall review the 2023 season. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time. No Ciaron today, but instead we have our first return guest, the Liam Lawson of the podcast, the Mobile Chicane. Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me back. Who do I need to talk to about the punch cards? I was told I'd get a free coffee if I come in for 10 appearances.
Oh, I don't have a response to that. Sorry, Con. You caught me off guard with that.
Sorry.
That was really good. I was just muted.
Yeah. I'm not quick. Could we do... Oh.
Let's do that again. I think we had a brain freeze. Let's do that
yeah. I was just like, what? How do I respond to that? Like, it just... Yeah.
Does he know he's not getting a coffee?
That was really good. Just I got completely...
Yeah, that was... Should I introduce... Yeah,
just introduce Chicane again.
No, make this a blooper at the end of the podcast. Can we do that? Can we do that again? I'll introduce Chicane again. All right.